Welcome to the Milwaukee Astronomical Society's YouTube channel. Today's topic is an introduction to PixInsight's dynamic background extraction, DBE. DBE is one of the most important and powerful processes in the PixInsight toolbox. It is an important first step in post-image processing. Enjoy the presentation. Your flats don't know anything about the sky gradients. And so and what we're seeing here, as I mentioned, that particular night, we had a near full moon. Moon was like 98% full, and we had just gotten all of 6 or 9 inches of snow on the ground. And so there was a lot of snow. There was a lot of reflections coming off from the moon, off the ground. And I was getting just a really severe, gradient here. And so I typically take when I see gradients like this, one of the really in the dynamic background extraction is one of the oldest tools. A lot of people like Adam Block say that DBE made PixInsight famous. I mean, it is probably one of the most useful tools in cleaning up during your very first step of post-processing. So we're actually into post-processing at this point. I've calibrated the images, I've integrated them, and now I have a master H alpha. Along with this, I have a master S2 and a master O3. And so I do a little cleanup. I get rid of gradients and any kind of optical noise on each of these masters, and I also do a little noise reduction on the masters themselves before I combine them into an RGB. But tonight we're going to kind of just focus on the dynamic background extraction, and so what I do is I do 2 passes. On the first thing I'll do is kind of remove the kind of gross linear gradient that you see here. I see very dark on the top, very light on the bottom. So we're going to try and eliminate that, and that's usually the first step. There's a lot of intricate things about the dynamic background extractor. Is you place sample points, and as you move that sample point around, you can actually see where the stars are at, and so on and so forth. Now, what you're trying to do is not sample the nebulosity or the stars, but the background information itself. Okay. And so this little window that tells you where your sample is at, so this little green box is your sample that's going to go into this algorithm that's going to subtract out these gradients from your image. And so if you look at the default of DBE, I think this tolerance number, and I'll explain what that is in a second, I believe is set at 0.5. And what the tolerance level is doing is here's my sample that's going to go into the algorithm. This is obviously a black and white image, and so I'm only going to get the K value here. So this is going to give me the mean brightness of my sample, and this weight number down here, this 0.658, is going to tell me, how much contribution this sample is going to give to the algorithm. And so you don't want to contribute to the algorithm a lot of noise. And so you really want to increase the so-called tolerance. And what the tolerance actually is the 1 sigma point, is a sigma measurement from the mean. So 1 sigma, 2 sigmas, 3 sigmas from the mean. So it's just a statistical representation of how much data you want to include in this sample point. Okay, is that? And I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. So if I raise this up to a 1 sigma, this little annoying message, I'm going to put just a couple other points up here. It just says that you can't analyze this image with 1 data point. Yeah, okay. And so if I raise this up to 1 sigma, you can see now the background has gotten lighter. And if you look at the weight of this sample now, it's all the way up to like 0.8. So it's going to contribute quite a bit to the algorithm, and that's a good thing. And you want to keep increasing that tolerance so that you are very, very sensitive to the background. But the downside of that is if you do that and you sample a star, that star is going to make more of a contribution. So if I go back to that 0.5, I'll get that horrible message. So I'm going to put my data point here. So you can see that the contribution, if I'm not on a star, is a weight of 0.7. But if I'm on a star, you see that contribution of that data point is actually going to go way down to 0.5. Okay, and so you got a balancing act there. So you want to so if I go to 5 sigma, which is where a lot of us scientists like to be with respect to our data, you can see that now the contribution of this whole cell is 0.9, but now I can't, and now the stars are going to be contributing a lot. So I have to be very, very careful that when I go to those high tolerances, that I'm only on a background and no stars. Okay, does that make sense? This is all about the data going into the algorithm. I won't talk about shadowing. That's just another thing that if you have really dark data points, it lightens up those darker ones. The smoothing factor is associated with what kind of transitions are you looking for. In this particular case, I'm going to be looking for just a gross gradient across this entire image. I'm not going to take a lot of samples because I'm really looking for a very smooth transition between the dark and the light. So, and again, I got these numbers from Adam. And so you could play around. And in fact, Adam goes to the extreme. He actually puts this at a tolerance of 10 so that all of his data points are extremely sensitive. Look, now we're up to like 0.927 is the weight of every data point. So you've got to be really careful that data point's not going to be on a nebula, any part of the nebulosity or a star. So even though it dropped to 0.8, that star is going to be a big contributor to the algorithm that subtracts the background. That all makes sense at this point? All right, so cool. So that's just a little background about the tool. And so the first thing I do is I set this tolerance to 10. That's the default. When I open this up, I've saved all of these parameters in these process icons, and then I build a library of process icons that I use, during my processing session. So if I open this up, everything is already set to a tolerance of 10. This shadow at 3, that's a kind of default that I leave alone. And the smoothing, it goes all the way up to 1. So I have it up at 0.6 per Adam's recommendation. And then when I'm not going to use auto generation of samples. I'll show you how that works in a minute. But I'm going to, when I calculate that background, I'm going to subtract it and replace the target image with the corrected image. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to place about 4 data points in each quadrant, so I can get just an overall view, especially with this smoothing factor at 0.6. So I'm just going to place a couple of data points here. Put about 4 data points. You don't need very many. Oops. And if you misplace something, you can always drag a data point to another location, and you can actually find a sweet spot where there's no stars. And so I'm going to just put another one here and another one here, and then I'm going to sample this lower quadrant and put a couple data points in here. And I'm just going to do the same thing on this last quadrant. All right, now let's just move that guy up there. Okay, and what do I got? 1, 2, 3, and yeah, here's another data point down here. All right, so at this point, I'm not going to obviously correct everything that's wrong with this image, but it's going to take out the kind of the gross linear gradient, first. So let me execute that. And so now let's take a look. So this is actually the background the gradient that I'm going to be subtracting. So let me zoom in on that, and sure enough, I see this gradient here where it's from the dark. Now, I don't have a lot of data points, but I certainly can see where that linear gradient is at, where it goes from the darker area all the way down to a lighter area. All right, so we don't actually need that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, and it says, am I going to be done? I'm going to remove the stretch and then reapply the stretch. Okay, and so what we've gotten rid of is there's still some bad spots here, but with respect to kind of a linear gradient of like this area relative to this area, and a little improvement over here, but there's still obviously some areas that need improvement, but at least I've gotten rid of the linear variance, and now what I'm left with is all the other reflections and light pollution issues that I need to deal with. Everything okay up to this point? Okay. So now this last step is very, very tedious, and so I have a much different. So I have another process icon. The tolerance is the same. The shadow factor is the same, but now the smoothing factor is all the way down to 0.2, and what that means is it's going to be, instead of smoothing out and spreading out and looking for big areas of the image, it's going to be very, very localized, because I've got a lot of localized funny stuff going on in this image, and I want to concentrate on those areas. Now, one of the things that Adam has recently suggested is is in order to get rid of all of this kind of, light pollution and reflections in this image, you're going to need a lot of samples. And so one thing you can do with DBE is have it auto-generate samples. And so I can say how many samples, what the radius of the samples are, how many do I want per row? And I can actually have it generate all of the samples. Now, Adam's point is this is a real pain in the butt, because you've got to remove all of the samples that are within the nebulosity and look at all the samples that are, in fact, included in stars. So if I look at this sample, that's a sample that's going to have to be moved away from that star. Well, that's a lot of work, right? And I used to very meticulously do that. Now, what Adam is suggesting is that you remove the stars before you sample the image, but you still have to remove those samples from the nebulosity. And if you got like a big nebulosity that's pretty full field, you're still going to end up with a hell of a lot of work, even though you've removed the ones that have overlapped the stars. So overlapping stars isn't the issue, but for this particular image, it's removing all of the samples within the nebulosity. That's going to be a lot of work as well. All right. So what I've been playing with, I'm not going to do it that way. What I am going to do is go back into my and now this is very time consuming, but it can also be very accurate. I will go ahead and manually put in 20 or so data points within each quadrant. Now, I'm not going to take the time to do all of this. I'll do a little more sampling than what I would have done with the linear extraction. But because the influence of each data point has a small region around it because of this smoothing factor, I'm going to have to put in an awful lot of samples in order to clean this up. So typically I will spend 10 or 15 minutes very nicely in getting inside some of these dark regions here within the nebulosity. And I will manually place all of these samples. Okay. And so you do have to be a bit anal about this, but the results are very good. Now, I certainly have not done enough samples, and we're not going to eliminate everything. I'm going to heavily emphasize this area down here that I see, a lot of nastiness. All right, and let me do a few more things. Any questions while I'm sampling this poor guy to death? All right, so I haven't gotten everything, but I'll pretty much outline this nebulosity with samples, but I do want to avoid any of the. I don't want to put samples anywhere inside any nebulosity. Okay. All right. Well, I can actually be doing this for about another 10 minutes, but I won't in the interest of time. Let me just put a couple more in here. Get rid of some of this darkness within the nebulosity itself. And so what's nice is always keep one eye on this window here to make sure you're not including any stars. Okay. All right. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and execute this. And so let's take a look at what we're extracting. And sure enough, you see all this garbage down here, and so this really needs to be, you know, far more detailed. But for the sake of example here, so I'm going to close this. And I didn't sample this area very well, I can tell. But let me remove the stretch and then restretch it. So we're making a lot of you know, I didn't put any samples in this area, but you can see the dramatic improvement of the image. And yeah, it takes a lot of time, but boy, it's time well spent, because if you do this with each of your masters, then your RGB image is going to look great. Now the last thing I do, if I zoom in here, I see still a lot of interstellar noise here, and so what I'll typically do is I'll do a multiscalar linear transformation while I'm still in the linear mode, and again, these are all preset factors for this noise reduction program. And if you look real hard, you'll see that this program does a really nice job of cleaning up the noise, you know, in between the stars. So we're starting to get a pretty decent looking image here. Obviously, it's only the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully that kind of covers DBE. And if you're using a one-shot color camera, you're gonna follow the exact same procedures. You're going to do a linear extraction first with just, you know, 4 samples per quadrant, using that large smoothing factor. And then once you process that, you're going to go back in and do a more aggressive background extraction, again on the color image. So once I make an RGB image, I will do 2 more passes of the dynamic background extractor. All right. Any questions?
So Dennis, just to kind of recap, you're doing the DBE on each of your masters, your S, H, and O, or R, G, and B.
Great. Yep.
And then you're doing it again once you color combine it. Yeah,
because you'll actually pick up some artifacts once you combine the individual masters into an RGB. I've inevitably have seen some additional background errors once I've combined the RGB.
And then and you're using, it's a little hard to see on my screen here.
Oh, okay.
And my eyeballs as well. You know, I'm seeing all those green stars. You're using subtraction?
Yes. Yeah. Let me actually. Oops. Let me go back to that.
And you might have said that earlier.
Yeah. You have 2 choices here. You can do division and subtraction. It turns out that at least according to Adam, if you're trying to eliminate light pollution, where you got blotchy reflections, you've got all these inconsistencies in your background. It's not uniform by any way, shape, or form. And then you've got like a gradient, like a snow gradient, as I would call it. Those are better removed by doing a subtraction. Now, if you've got some really bad vignetting, you may want to use the dynamic background extractor just to remove the vignetting. And the best way to remove the vignetting is by using division.
Okay.
So the simple noise pollution, linear gradients, subtraction. If you want to focus on, for whatever reason, your optical system has some pretty bad vignetting or your image cone is not filling your chip, and you've got some pretty serious vignetting. You want to use the data. You want to use the division, and you may also want to use a different tool. It's called the actual tool, and basically what I can do is build an octagon here on the screen. I don't know if you guys can see this, but
Yes.
but I can do a whole series of octagons like this. And then if I put another sample here, do an axial, increase the numbers, whoops, axial, and increase the number. You know, you now can actually do, let's just try it. I don't know what's going to happen. And let's do a division here. This is obviously not vignetting, it's a nebula. But oops. So let's do division. And this should actually end up being pretty horrible, I would think. So it's getting rid of your vignetting in this particular case. It's getting rid of your nebulosity. So let's see what the nebula looks like. Actually, it doesn't look all that bad. Well, let me restretch it. Well, anyway, it actually worked better than I thought it was going to. But that's how you would get rid of vignetting, is using division.
So what, I guess one thing I'm taking away is I usually only have used DBE once, and what you're saying is it can be used multiple times incrementally to get at different aspects of,
yeah. So in one night, if I have 3 masters, you know, I will do 6 DBEs plus 2 more. I'll do a total of 8 DBEs in one session. Yeah, but I'm pretty anal too. So, and again, it just all depends on your level of just how well you want these images, to look, and what the final product's going to be.
So Dennis, I've got a question regarding kind of the distribution and placement of those samples.
Yes.
You'll have some parts of the image where the background looks pretty good, right?
Right.
And you got other areas where it's obvious that there's an issue. Are you just trying to get a fairly broad, even distribution of those samples across the image, or are you trying to target good versus bad?
No, no. Well, a little of both. You do want to get a fairly good distribution of all areas. Okay. And so that's why Adam kind of suggests that auto generation. You see that's very uniform rows, nicely evenly spaced. But then you got to go in there, and sometimes it's hard to see those little green boxes, right, if you got a bright nebula, and so deleting all of those takes a long time. Plus, if you're not removing the stars, then looking for every sample that's being weighted down by stars is very time consuming. But the short answer is is you want a nice even distribution, but then I will actually add data points. Like you saw me adding some data points in those two little bright spots.
Right.
So I'll put additional points on areas that I want to put a little more emphasis on as well.
So looking at the image that you have up here, you can see kind of towards the center on the right, there's a section there that's got some pretty dark background.
Yeah, I didn't.
Is that
Well,
good or bad?
well, to your point, I didn't sample that area.
Okay.
Yeah, and so by accident, I've demonstrated how important it is to get a uniform sampling.
Oh, I think that was on purpose. You just didn't want to.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Sure. All right. Well, if that's not, as always, feel free to email me. And I've had a few folks contact me after these sessions, and I've done private tutorials and private image processing with folks on Zoom. So, I don't. Most of you who know me know that I don't have a life. So, so don't ever hesitate to contact me if you want to chat about this stuff, or get a little private processing session in. You're muted, Kevin.
I said, Dennis, if we had more clear nights, I bet you'd have more of a life.
Oh, no, but then I'd have more data to process. Yeah, so no, actually, since the semester has started, I'm actually, it's blasphemy, but because classes have started, and a lot of my NASA presentations have started, I have very little time in the evenings, but that's why I automated the observatory, and thank goodness for Voyager.
Yep.
Voyager really does all of my work for me now.